In last year's U.S. elections, gender was a key issue. As President Trump announced his cabinet and began working with Congress, it continued to be a central topic. Many lament that in the U.S., the highest glass ceiling remains intact. But in Africa, that ceiling came crashing down long ago. Africa has now had several women heads of state. And with a deep bench of women in leadership positions, there are plenty in the pipeline. Hello, I'm Carol Pino. Welcome to our special series, Africa and the Trump Administration. The U.S. paints a picture of itself as the global champion of women, particularly in the developing world. USAID and other government agencies push African governments to advance women's empowerment and participation in government. Several American celebrities have made women's issues in Africa their special cause. As gender becomes front and center in the U.S. culture wars, some warn that President Trump will roll back women's rights, not just in the U.S., but throughout the world. And yet, here's an inconvenient truth. For women's participation in government, the U.S. ranks 101st. Yes, more than 100 countries, including almost half of African nations, have a higher percentage of women in government than the U.S. And the #1 country with the most women in government is right in the heart of Africa, Rwanda. In the U.S. Congress, just over 19% of seats are held by women. In Rwanda, 64%. President Trump has assembled the least diverse cabinet in recent history. The Rwandan president's cabinet, it's half women. And cracking that highest glass ceiling? In Africa, it came crashing down long ago when Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was elected president of Liberia. And since then, there have been several others. We have two amazing women with me today. We have Her Excellency Joyce Banda, former president of Malawi, and Her Excellency Matilda Mukantabana, ambassador of Rwanda in the U.S. Thank you so much for being here. So let's talk first about how Africa got to this state. It's really a pretty amazing thing. You've done so much work on this. Maybe you can give us an overview.
African women have been leaders long before colonization. We have on the continent of Africa, queen mothers, emperors. We have, like in Malawi, there was a lady by the name of Namlange Nguled. And when the Portuguese came, they were trying to divide her land and her nation. She led her nation to war, and she was executed by the Portuguese. We have several in West Africa. The Queen Mother of Ghana actually shamed the men there because when the colonialists came, she was the only one resisting. The men had already given in. So we've always been leaders. Then came colonization, and some have said those that colonized some of the countries on the continent did not have in their system windows where they could allow women to participate in leadership. Patriarchy set in and the women were pushed aside for 50 years. So when they started now fighting for freedom, women across the continent stood up and fought side by side. This world must look at Africa and see that there's something they can learn from us. Absolutely. What is it that we have done right? But as of now, Ellen Sirleaf was indeed the first president. Then came myself. Yes. Then after me, Catherine Panza was the transitional president, female president in Central African Republic. Right now, we have an elected president in Mauritius.
And a couple of others.
And we are going to have more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Rwanda has been amazing in what you've done. And this has really been a structural engagement of the government, has it not?
Yes. In the case of Rwanda, we had also women in pre-colonial times who were pretty powerful. But we were disrupted. Our history was completely brought to a standstill with the genocide of 1994. So for us, the empowerment of women of Rwanda was an intentional will from the government of empowering the people, not just women. We believe that women have to have full rights like the other people. So there was intention from government, in all the programs of the government, there was that inclusion of women as part of our development. And that, that was done within the legal framework. It was passed in our constitution. And then the implementation phase also followed. Women were not just subjects, they were agents in that change. The women proved themselves when the country was in the ashes, and they were part of reconstruction efforts in Rwanda.
The story of Rwanda post-genocide is so much a story of inclusiveness.
That's right.
That the very people who created the genocide, you still pulled them in together and built the country. Does that sort of lay a groundwork for inclusiveness of women as well?
Exactly, because women, especially when it comes to reconciliation, they are the ones who kept the society together. You know, women are tending to the children, they are tending to the society. Sometimes they were married even to the other side that has committed the genocide. So it was an intimate reconciliation also on many different levels, and women were there to do so. You are looking at movements that are coming from different parts. One coming from the top, that willingness of government, good governance, inclusion of women, but also women opening up their own sphere of influence by doing what they have been doing. Whether it's in economic reconstruction, whether you are talking about political organization on local and provincial and then national level, and also talking about women being the heart of that reconciliation, bringing people together.
What President Kagame has done by having a cabinet that is almost 50%, that is what we call political will. Because it is just him who decided, with my pen, I can put these names and the women are there so they can participate in leadership. What we have found on the continent of Africa is that women are qualified for the jobs. So we felt that they were not just being given a chance. When I got into office, I took advantage of the same power. So for the first time in the country of Malawi, we had a Chief Justice that was female. We had a head of civil service that was female. Solicitor General that was female. 2 deputy governors of Reserve Bank. 8 district commissioners. So I made 100 appointments. Because I had now the ability to do it. When they got into the jobs, they worked hard and they proved themselves that they were able. When we went to Beijing in 1995, we agreed that we are going to go back home and get into positions of leadership. We have found a way of working with our men, which I call our own style of feminism, is to make sure that we are not men haters. We must not underrate the male power. We engage men. We work with them. We don't antagonize them. We respect them. They help us build one brick at a time until we get to the top. Don't tell us it's wrong, because I believe that the rest of the world has a thing or two to learn from Africa.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting point that you bring up, that women's empowerment does not exclude men's empowerment.
No.
They are not mutually exclusive.
If we say they are part of the problem, they must be part of the solution.
Absolutely.
It's a matter of common sense. Why is common sense not very common?
That is the big question. For more than 20 years, U.S. administrations have focused international efforts on women's empowerment. But drastic budget cuts will almost certainly reduce or eliminate many programs that benefit women throughout the world. Real change starts with making sure gender issues are supported by the laws of the land. For that, women must have a seat at the table, and they do in many African countries. The benefit is not just for women and children. There's also evidence that it may result in more peace and prosperity. But political advances for women don't always produce societal gains, and sometimes there's even a backlash. Now, Madam President, you've actually talked about the backlash for a number of women presidents, that they have had difficulty they've gotten into power, but then there's a backlash against them, and it's difficult to stay in power.
Women have managed to get to a place where they can compete equally with men, campaign, stand for office, get into leadership, including State House. When they get to State House, the challenge we find is to keep them there. So if you follow what happened in Australia to Julia Gillard, if you see what happened in Thailand to the Prime Minister there, in Philippines, the same happened in Zimbabwe, that Joyce Mujuru, who fought and was vice president for 10 years, she was kicked out because she was accused of being a witch. The same happened in Brazil, a woman president being impeached, and it clearly stating on TV that she is not mentioned in the corruption going on, but she is the one investigating those that are impeaching her. You can see what is happening now. The president that championed that impeachment has himself been charged of corruption. But we've lost a leader who nobody can explain clearly what is it exactly that she did wrong. And that is happening around the world. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright launched a campaign to look at abuses to women in politics and even those standing for office. And we were shocked when we discovered that there isn't proper data. There's no evidence that has been collected and compiled, no research that talks about exactly what is it that women are going through. We have formed a Women Leaders Network. One of the concerns is this concern that women are being stripped naked while campaigning, beaten up while campaigning, or they are trying to say, we want to participate equally, we want to go to parliament, we want to sit where the laws are made. Why is it that we get to the top and then we don't stick there? Forces will be there that will make sure that we disappear.
It strikes me, as the president is talking about this, how in Rwanda, it doesn't seem that that's happened. And I wonder if that's because this has support from the top, that this is top all the way to the bottom.
Representation by itself is just the first step. It has really to be supported by other things. You know, just to be in a parliament by itself, you can just be a figurehead if you are just there. Yes. But for us in Rwanda, and why it's successful, why we have a spokesperson for the government as a woman, foreign affairs minister, when the person spearheading all the economic development is a woman, when you are talking about women in real political powers, not just the ones that are secondary, it's because other programs went along to support that representation. We are talking about including women in education and educational places where usually they didn't go. That now our women are pilots, they are police people, they are in the military, they are in peacekeeping. Even the scourge of family violence has been tackled because of that. How did we do that? Like one-stop center, called the Isange, where you can go and then you find a policeman who is a woman, who is going to listen to your case. You have a lawyer, probably who is a woman, a gynecologist, a legal advisor, and then these people are going to listen. And that has been criminalized by Women Push, you know, women in inheritance. Before we didn't inherit the land. Now women are using the land as a collateral to borrow the money. So what I'm saying, quite frankly, empowerment is not just about representation. It's about what comes around representation.
It's extraordinary to me. I mean, it's only been about just under 25 years since the genocide. I reported on the first conviction ever of rape as a genocidal crime that happened in Rwanda. The programs that you have installed within Rwanda, this was not part of the society and that you've created in really not that much time to totally change society.
And changing also the world, because, you know, after the Holocaust, there was no crime that was under the genocide talking about rape. Those women in Rwanda who went to Tanzania in the International Tribunal for Rwanda are the ones who push for that to be included.
So we can get women into power through signing legislation, but to keep them in power, we have to change society.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Otherwise, it won't work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's you
it
said
is
it beautifully.
Change your mindset. To look at a woman and say, well, she too can be a leader. And the benefits are many. Women love peace. They will make sure they find a way of resolving those conflicts amicably and peacefully. They also are inclusive. In my case, what I did is when there were issues of national interest, I needed the whole nation to understand you must invite the opposition parties. So for the first time, the opposition parties and the head of state sitting together in State House discussing matters of state. Leadership is a love affair. You must love the people, you must fall in love with the people, and the people must fall in love with you. Once that happens, you will never want them to be exploited. It is your duty to protect them.
Africa today boasts an impressive number of women heads of state. and quota systems in many countries have dramatically increased the number of women in parliament and throughout government. This gives a platform where women can showcase their abilities, build essential networks, and become part of the power structure. It also makes it so society sees women in leadership as the norm. Polling shows Africans support women in government, but that doesn't always guarantee votes at the ballot box. General elections, whether in Africa or elsewhere, are often brutal for women candidates. Africa's pipeline of women in government is full, but will that translate into a larger number of women as heads of state? And can gains in Africa serve as an inspiration for women everywhere? So you have talked about how you had a lot of difficulty throughout your presidency, a lot of forces trying to come against you.
I think the greatest challenge that we face in being first is that people don't know how to deal with you at that point in time. And so I was the first woman to chair a statutory corporation in Malawi. And then I was the first woman to be vice president in Malawi. And I was the first female president in Malawi. For the longest time, Malawians saw this leader coming up. So that when finally I became president, they were not surprised. Otherwise, I was very fortunate that I had a good team.
Ambassador, your president just recently became the president of the African Union as well. How do you think that that's going to impact women in leadership positions throughout Africa? Will the Rwandan example, will he be able to push that agenda throughout Africa?
Let me tell you, I have to say that also we have an amazing agenda when it comes to women within the African Union. I have also to add that our president being, the head of the African Union and his understanding about women and his being a champion for women equality is going to do a lot in terms of implementation. President Kagame last year when we had the AU meeting in Kigali, he was selected to spearhead the efforts for reforms for the entire continent. And he did, and people accepted the reforms he was proposing. Now he's into the implementation phase. So you can imagine that if they trusted him with the reforms, it's also that he will trust when the implementation about gender issues is going to be. So I'm very happy with that. And it's not a matter of saying we own this, but I think all African countries, we are learning from each other, from what people have done right. And this is why the intra-African trade, the intra-African communication, and all these things are key for us, for all of the African states. So we have been learning from Africans, but they are learning from us as well. And we happen to be champions for women, and I hope that they'll take that good practice.
Do you think that Africa and all that it has done to really empower women in government, do you think that this can be an inspiration throughout the world and in the U.S. for the people who want more women in leadership?
I think it's an inspiration for people who want really to start looking at the United States as a partner, not a prescriptive partner. No, we are, if we make a collaboration. And I think that Africa is moving to become a worthy partner. But what I'm saying is that I've seen positive signs where actually people are talking in terms of partnerships and to understand where, that we all understand the universal values, but how do you apply it based upon context and where you are. That is an opening, and also very positive partnerships like the one you are having. Even having us here, giving a voice to women from Africa, I think this is a beginning, because I believe that sometimes, based upon where I go, sometimes people don't even know these things are happening in Africa. Yeah. So it's a conversation that needs to take place on an extended basis.
I was participating on a panel 3 weeks ago, and a question from the moderator asked, what do you feel about America saying it will be America first, and Britain saying it will be Britain first? And this is an opportunity. When we can see that globally people are looking now inside their countries, we must respect that. If that's what President Trump and the American government have said, we must respect that. We must understand that's their model. It's sad, it's unfortunate, they're abdicating this leadership position, others will step in. But as far as Africa is concerned, we must sit back and take advantage of this opportunity to empower ourselves, put our priorities right, get our natural resources, our diamonds, our gold, put them in the pocket of the houses of the poor, and we shall prosper.
And that is what women's leadership does.
That's what women's leadership does.
We're going to take some questions from our viewers. Ellen in Pittsburgh asks, how can the U.S. help to empower women to be in government in Africa? Will U.S. budget cuts hurt African women's chances to get into leadership? You know, President Banda, this is actually a very interesting question. The NGOs take on this whole thing of we are the ones who will empower African women. Meanwhile, Africa's doing it themselves. But it's like the NGOs have taken the narrative and Africans are doing it.
What I have always said is that international NGOs, we need to partner. In order for us to do it right, we need to work together. So when they get into Africa, they need to identify local NGOs and work in partnership in order to yield more. Why? Because going back to what I said, we have our own culture and our own traditions. I remember one time there was an organization that I will not mention from another country in the West that came to provide training for us standing for office to go to parliament. And they told us, you must look the people in the eye, you must be assertive, be loud, make yourself very clear. Now, that is the first step I must take to lose an election in Africa. So we work together. For example, the Norwegian government provided funds through the National Gender Coordinating Network into the pockets of women candidates, regardless of what party, so that they are able to go on the ground and compete side by side with men and win an election. We went from 11 women to 27 to 45 because of the support that was coming from there. But they didn't come into Malawi and say, oh yeah, we know what to do, come here, we will train you. No, don't train me, because you can come so we can work together, identify those that can train, according to our own culture and tradition, on how we can win favor at grassroots.
But you know, I think in partnering, one of the things that has to happen is that the African partner has to insist on being the spokesperson for the project, because otherwise it's the NGO that takes the narrative and takes all the credit. Because you're exactly right. It's the Africans on the ground who are doing it.
Let's face it, Africa has been always considered like a second-class continent for a long time. Through its history, most of it not because of our own making. When you go from slavery to colonialism, there is a certain agency that is taken away from the people. And this is what Africa has been doing since independence, sometimes by baby steps, but to regain that agency, to be really in the realm of our independence. And I think now we are at a place where we can say we are really getting there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Abdul in Dar es Salaam asks, why does it matter whether we have a man or a woman as president? Don't we just want the best person for the job? So, Ambassador, why does it matter?
I agree with him. We don't want a figurehead president. Like, for instance, President Anna has told us exactly that. She proved herself even before then. She was fit for the office. We don't want a woman just to be a woman president for the sake of being a woman president. This is, we are at a point where our countries are countries that need the best, whether it's a man or a woman. But at least in my view, and based upon what we do, is that the ground is prepared for a woman to succeed as well, as men. But it doesn't mean that the woman has to take the job to show that we are open to women empowerment. It will be actually a disservice. Let me give you one example. You remember the program that was known as affirmative action here in the country?
Yes. That is still being argued with the culture wars here.
Exactly. So there was a time when people were saying, oh, they are putting people of color so they can show they are putting people of color. That's not what we are looking for in Africa. In Africa, or in Rwanda in particular, if a woman comes and she's capable, and our women are starting, they are proving themselves to be capable. That's why they have been, initially we had 30%, then 48% in parliament, then 56%, then now 64%. When we have a leader who has proven he can also lead this country, It can be a man or a woman, but we don't just want any woman to come because she's a woman.
All we are saying is that we are here and we are ready. We can also lead. We stand to benefit when men and women work together and for the betterment of the lives of their people. So if I stand for election and I win, and I'm a woman, the men should rally around me and work with me. Mm-hmm. If it is a man, he must make sure that men and women are also participating in leadership. Yeah.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thank you so much to my guests, President Joyce Banda, Ambassador Matilda Mukantabana. To our viewers in Africa, America, and around the world, thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to hear from you with thoughts on this program and comments and questions on previous topics. We want this series to create a respectful but robust debate on U.S.-Africa relations under this new administration. Be sure to visit us online, friend us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter to make sure your voice is heard. We hope you've enjoyed the program and that you'll continue to tune in for our entire series on Africa and the Trump administration.